Hello, my name's John Ward. I live in the beautiful city of Bristol in the southwest of England. You may recall that we have the famous Clifton Suspension Bridge here, one of Isambar Kingdom Brunel's marvels. I was one of the baby boomers born in 1946, after the jubilation of the war ending in 1945. You may recall the celebrations on VE Day, VJ Day. The United Nations was established in 1945 in October, and it was set up to prevent another conflict such as we've just experienced, and also to maintain international peace and security. And so people were really hopeful. Maybe we were entering into a new era of peace and prosperity. And their hopes were raised even more when the United Nations organization had inscribed on the wall outside the building, "Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." Well, however old you are, if you're my age, you will know that there's been conflict ever since 1945, and some terrible, terrible wars. Right now we've got the conflict in Syria and Yemen. We have millions of refugees fleeing from war zones, millions fleeing from poverty, and it goes on and on. And since 1945, the nations around the earth have continued to stockpile weapons of mass destruction far, far greater than any of the weapons that were used in the Second World War. And America is one of the biggest arms producers. America, that claims to be a Christian nation. On their notes and on their coins it says, "In God we trust." And every American president that I could ever remember concludes his speeches by saying, "God bless America." So when it says "in God we trust," surely they mean in arms we trust, don't they? They don't put their trust in God. They put their trust in weapons. In fact, the whole world seems to be gearing up for a mighty war eventually that will annihilate mankind. Interestingly, in 1947, a figurative clock was produced, and it was now known as the Doomsday Clock. And at that point, it was 7 minutes to midnight. Now you'll notice from the chart that it's been moving backwards and forwards over the years, and right now in August 2018 it stands at 2 minutes to midnight. Now why is it that close? Well, it's not just war anymore, not just a nuclear war that we have to fear. There's something just as critical, just as worrying, and that is global warming, or if you prefer, climate change. I've spent 40 years studying this subject, and that's what I want to share with you now. But let me reassure you that a nuclear war will not happen. Now you might say, well, how can I be so certain? Well, I am, and later on I'll tell you exactly why I know it will never happen. If you were told that everybody's dead but don't know it yet, that if we don't act now, it may be too late, and that the boat has gone over the Niagara, you may be feeling, well, someone's trying to scare the living daylights out of me. But actually these comments were made by responsible scientists, ecologists and the like, very concerned about our lovely planet and what man was doing to it, and very concerned for the future of their children and their grandchildren. The first comment by Paul Ehrlich, why did he say such a thing? Well, he knew that governments didn't have the political will or the desire to do anything about it. They were more concerned about GDP, and you know that stands for Gross Domestic Product. You have to have growth even at the expense of the earth. Now, is that a good thing? Well, ask Robert Walpole, the poor man who died at 22. He was 8 feet 11 inches. Don't you think he wished he was able to stop growing much earlier? Maybe at 6 foot he would have been happy with 6 foot, I'm sure, as would anyone. In 1800, there was 1 billion people on this planet. When I was born in 1946, there were now 2.3 billion. And in my own lifetime, that has gone to close to 8 billion people. Now, is that good? What do you think? 8 billion people all needing oxygen, food, materials, and there's 8 billion people close on who are having to give off waste as well. So, no, growth is not necessarily a good thing. The second comment was by a scientist in the 70s. Jimmy Carter was the president at the time, and as you may recall, he was a peanut farmer with naturally a real desire to find out how serious global warming was. They did a comprehensive report, and the last line in that report said, "If we don't act now, it may be too late." So, have they acted? Are there governments in the world that have taken heed of those final comments? Well, what do you think? Has America done anything in the last 40 years to reverse this trend? As any country, there might be one or two small countries that have done their very best to solve this issue, but of course they're in the minority. The final comment, the boat has gone over the Niagara. Now that sounds ominous, doesn't it? Because you can't get a boat back up once it's gone over the Niagara. But that comment was made by probably the most noted scientist of them all, Professor James Lovelock. He recognized that the Earth is a self-regulating system. He actually proposed the Gaia Hypothesis, that the Earth was a living, breathing organism. Gaia being an ancient mythological goddess of fertility, and we live on a very fertile planet, don't we? But we are and have been destroying it systematically for a long, long time. 80% of the forests that were originally on the planet, they're gone. 90 acres of forests are cut down every single minute. That's the equivalent of 20 football pitches. Who cares? 40% of phytoplankton from the ocean is gone. And is that important? Well, don't forget, we depend on trees, phytoplankton and vegetation for our oxygen. That is so very vital that we must not interfere with that. There's something else which is equally wicked, is that 8 million tons of plastic get poured into the ocean every year. 8 million tons. You may remember the story not so long ago of a poor whale. It seemed to be pleading for help on the coastline. It was dying. They hauled it out by crane, opened up its tummy, and they discovered 65 pounds in weight of plastic. That poor creature must have suffered for quite some time. Now, if one whale had 65 pounds of plastic in its tummy, are there any creatures out there without any at all? You just imagine, all those sea creatures, the turtles, and the sharks, the whales, even the smaller fish, can all be taking this horrible plastic into their system. Well, as I mentioned earlier, ecosystems are delicate. We alter them at our peril. Just like the laws of the universe, they cannot be changed. They cannot even be adjusted slightly without life ceasing to exist. Let me give you an example of an ecosystem that was close to collapse, but saved in the nick of time. Have you ever heard the expression trophic cascade, or the ecology of fear? Well, in every environment, there's like a pecking order, and there's a top predator. There are other predators below, but there's a top predator. Creatures like sharks and tigers and wolves, etc. Well, let me tell you the story of Yellowstone Park. It was the first reserve set up in America, and it was designed to obviously maintain and preserve that beautiful park. And that was in 1872. By the time we get to 1980s, the park is in serious decline, and the scientists and the rangers can't figure it out. They don't know what's caused it. And after a lot of debate, two groups came up with the same solution. There was the group that were concerned that wolves were on the brink of extinction, and another group that, when they did their research to go back into the park, history, they found that at one time there were thousands of wolves in Yellowstone. And then at the end of the 19th century, a bounty was put on the head of every wolf. And the last wolf was shot dead in the early part of the 20th century. So, no wolves. Could that be the answer? Could it possibly be? They weren't sure whether it was climate change or what it was. But in 1995, and just 23 years ago, they reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone. And within a very short time, the park started to recover. They couldn't believe it. In fact, one ranger said it was mind-boggling to think that one animal could have such a profound effect on such a large ecosystem. And with the reintroduction of wolves, the beavers came back, the salmon came back, the birds and insects came back. How could that be? Well, if you go onto YouTube, you'll find that there's several documentaries on how the wolves brought life back to Yellowstone. Now, who removed the wolves in the first place? They didn't kill each other off, it was us, humans. We decided we'd get rid of them all. What's happening today? 1 million sharks are killed for their fins. Tigers are hunted and killed for their inners. Elephants for their tusks. Rhinos for their horns. What's going to happen to those ecosystems with the removal of these animals? The same thing that happened in Yellowstone Park. The ecosystem will collapse. A trophic cascade will happen. And a trophic cascade can only mean one thing: catastrophe. Catastrophe for all concerned. And that's catastrophe for us, besides those animals. I'd like to just spend a moment on the gases in our atmosphere. Now you notice from the pie chart that 78% is nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 1% of all the minor gases, which include methane and CO2, carbon dioxide. Now, nitrogen doesn't do anything for us at all. We breathe it in and we breathe it back out. But it accomplishes marvellous things with plants and trees. You've probably heard of photosynthesis. Well, light energy is captured and used to convert water vapour, CO2 and minerals into oxygen and energy-rich compounds. So as a result of this amazing process, the plants we eat give us energy. And it always amazes me that elephants and giraffes and rhinos and hippos and other huge creatures are vegetarians. They thrive, and look at their bulk, they're strong, they're full of energy, all as a result of plants. So we should be very grateful that there is an abundance of vegetation on the earth, not only as a food supply for us, but also to keep our oxygen levels where they are, where they should be. So we have to be very, very careful what we're doing to our planet. We may one day even find we're having difficulty breathing because the oxygen levels go below 21%. In view of those statements by scientists back in the 70s, which were alarming, I decided to do my own research, and what better place than my own homeland. England is where the Industrial Revolution began, and it was all a result of coal. Believe it or not, they were finding coal on the beaches off the North Sea, and they found coal to be far more efficient as a fuel, obviously, than timber. But in addition to the coal that was washed up, they also discovered coal underneath the land. And so they started mining. And they had a 1 horsepower pump. And this was 1 horse going round and round in circles, drawing up water, but they could only mine 90 feet below the surface. And there was vast amounts of coal much lower than that. So they had to try and come up with a method of drawing water up that was more powerful than just 1 horse. Thomas Newcomen in 1712 created the very first coal-fired or coal-powered steam engine, which enabled miners now to go far deeper. And because mining now became very competitive and cheap, the Industrial Revolution began, because now we had not only a source of energy, but a source of power, steam power. And so everywhere in Britain we had started to have trains and boats and industry and houses fueled or heated by coal. And so, which was wonderful. It seemed like the future was very bright, except for one thing. The pollution was terrible. You may have heard of the London smog, where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. I've been in that situation in my early days. And we then not only became exporters of these machines and industry and all the other things, we became the biggest exporters of pollution as well. So I wanted to see what effect all this pollution, all this CO2 being pumped into the atmosphere, was having on us here in England. And what's fascinating is that the Met Office has been keeping records of temperatures in central England since 1650. Now, if you can picture a triangle with London in the east, Bristol in the west, and the Midlands, and records of temperatures in that triangle for 370 years, that would give us a pretty good guide as to how things were going for us here. Well, the record temperature before the Industrial Revolution was 1733. The mean temperature for the entire year was 10.5 degrees. So I was expecting that to change quite rapidly with all this pollution. And yet, it was 101 years, and it was only 1/100th of 1 degree. So in 1834, the record now is 10.51. And I thought, well, how could that be? So I thought, well, that record must have been broken very soon after that. But no, it was 114 years before that record was broken. And now it was 10.64. And then in 1990, it was 10.65. So from 1733 to 1990, that's 257 years, the record temperature in central England had only gone up 15 hundredths of 1 degree. 15 hundredths. Then something happened. From 1990 to 2014, the record temperature went up 3/10 of 1 degree. That's twice as much as the previous 257 years. So something dramatic happened in 1990. So what I did, I looked at that period and just came up with a figure of 5 miles an hour. I'd like you to imagine an ascent. You've got a CO2 tanker going uphill for 257 years, and it's travelling at 5 miles an hour until we get to 1990. Now remember what I said? In 24 years, the temperature increased twice as much as the previous 257 years. That equates to the tanker now travelling at 105 miles an hour. We're now in an acceleration phase the world has never seen. Now when the tanker was going at 5 miles an hour, you had time to get out of his way. How do you get out of the way of a tanker doing 105 miles an hour? It's nigh impossible. And the big worry here, this tanker is driverless and has no brakes. what can we do about it? In the last 12 months, we keep hearing the word extreme. Now, you've heard of the expression 1 in 1,000-year event. So if you have a terrible event, then you don't expect it to happen if it's one of those for another 1,000 years. Well, in the last 12 months, we've been getting those events, one after the other. Do you remember last year, the hurricane season? We had Harvey, Maria, Nate, and Irma. They were devastating hurricanes, and two of them at least were 1 in 1,000-year events. They were following each other across the Atlantic. This year's Atlantic hurricane season is also equally hair-raising. There were 5 hurricanes 2 weeks ago in the Atlantic at the same time, and Florence caused devastation to the Carolinas. The most powerful typhoon to go across the Pacific also happened this year. And then you hear of the fires right down the coast of America on the west coast. Terrible fires in Greece, Sweden. Even in England, we had peat fires in the north of England. And you might not believe this, but in Greenland, that we think of as the ice-covered island, they had peat burning in Greenland. We're seeing things unprecedented. In fact, we keep hearing expressions like unprecedented disaster, extreme flooding. People say it felt like Armageddon. And you often hear commentators say of biblical proportions, unseen, unheard of in modern times. And that's where we're at. And this is just the beginning. Things are going to get much, much worse in the next year or two, next 5 years. And when scientists talk about certain things happening by 2050 or by 2100, I say we'll be seeing those things by 2025. You know, I mentioned about the acceleration. The tanker is now travelling at 105 miles an hour and getting faster. And you're hearing all kinds of amazing things like the permafrost, which is melting in the Arctic, is actually causing solid rock to melt. And I'd like to refer to this chart in Svalbard, north of Norway, where temperatures in the water are off the scale. Look at what's happened since 2014 to 2018, where temperatures have gone from below 0 to 16 degrees above 0. That should scare anybody, knowing that fact. Then you've got methane levels. Now look at the chart for methane. This is just in 2018. Look how much it's gone up, where we're at now. Methane is many times more deadly than CO2. And it's been released from cattle, landfill. Methane is also abundant in permafrost, and that, as I've said, is melting at an alarming rate. So the future looks bleak. It appears as if there's no hope for mankind at all. And yet, I know different. I said earlier that there will not be a nuclear war, and I'm absolutely certain on that. I'm also as convinced that climate change or global warming will not finish us. It will not create a situation where humanity is facing extinction. That will not happen either. And I don't believe scientists will come up with the answer because they haven't got one. In fact, I did an essay 10 years ago on this subject, and I said there, would you put your trust in a known paedophile to look after your children while you go off on a second honeymoon? You'd be mad, wouldn't you? So how can you put your trust in politicians, scientists, and commercial enterprise to solve the problems we face today when they are the problem? They put us in the situation we're in today. At this point, I would like to share some good news with you. Good news is in short supply. You'll be amazed to know that 2,000 years ago, a prophecy was made about the time we're living in now. And I'm reading from the New International Version of the Bible, and it's Revelation 11 verse 18. It says, the nations were angry. What a century of wars, and the 2 world wars, proof of that in our time, isn't it? And then it says, and your wrath came. That's God's own wrath came. And he had every reason to be angry, didn't he, with what we're doing to the planet. And then it says this, the time had come for destroying those who destroy the earth. What an amazing statement. 2,000 years ago, that was an impossibility. If you remember, in Jesus' day, the Roman Empire ruled supreme. What did they have? They had a catapult, they put a border on a catapult, and they could knock a wall over. In fact, with the means they had then, they were able to destroy Jerusalem in the year 70. They couldn't destroy the earth. They didn't have any chemicals or nuclear or all the things we've got today that we're using to pollute the planet and, in fact, effectively destroy it. No. What's the purpose of us being here? Why are we here at all? Why is this earth designed for life? And why does man now feel that he has the capability? Why is he stockpiling weapons, building even more powerful bombs, tanks, ships? Life is wonderful. We should be preserving it. And that was God's original purpose. I'd like to show you what it says in Isaiah 45:18. From the same version. This is what the Lord says. He who created the heavens, he is God. He who fashioned and made the earth. He did not create it to be empty. He formed it to be inhabited. Can you just picture an earth void of life, travelling through space? For what reason? It would be pointless, wouldn't it? What a useless planet. And all those planets in our solar system, they're there so that we can live here. Can you not see purpose in design? Now, if you have a problem with that, if you have a problem in actually believing that there is a God who created everything you see, can I suggest that you look at the Privileged Planet on YouTube. It's a documentary made by scientists from NASA and elsewhere who got together. They wanted to see if there was any evidence of intelligence behind the design of the universe. Please do look at that video. Now, if you're confused about all the conflicting views on climate change and global warming, and many people are, yes, because you could take the view, well, who is telling me the truth? I want to know the truth. I want to know whether it is a problem or whether it isn't a problem. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Can I suggest you go on the web again and check out Arctic News? 32 of the top environmental scientists contribute to that website. You will be alarmed at what you hear. They have got no political persuasion, they've got no governments telling them what to write. They're telling you how it is. You must look at that site and you'll see how what they're telling you agrees with what I've already told you, that we are on the brink. There may be many other questions you have about life and death and why we're here and what's the purpose of life and what the future holds. It could be any number of things, like, where are my loved dead ones now? Will I ever see them again? And if so, where? You almost certainly will have questions that you have asked and not yet found an answer. Can I suggest that you go to jw.org? Now, my initials are JW. This is not my website. I just happen to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And this website is in nearly 1,000 languages. You'll find the answers to your questions on this site. Please do check it out. And I'm going to do another production, because one thing I want you to really believe, and that is that God cares for you and for the planet,